The Syrian government appears to have fallen after a lightning offensive by rebels. President Bashar al-Assad fled Damascus on a plane for an unknown destination. This is according to two senior Syrian army officers. Syrian rebel forces say they've captured the capital, Damascus. President Biden and his team are monitoring the extraordinary events in Syria and are in touch with regional partners. It's a really complicated story, this. It seems to have caught the various parties off guard, including Iran and Russia. Whilst it's being celebrated in the local area, there are huge issues in terms of international security, what fills that void, and we'll try and put some meat on the bone and try to explain a little more about it. Joining me now is Colonel Simon Diggins, who's a military and defence analyst and friend of the programme. Good morning to you, Simon.
David, good morning to you as well.
This is incredibly complicated, but perhaps we can just unpick it slightly. This seems, when at first glance, to have happened very quickly. Less than 2 weeks, it has happened very quickly. And lots of people are speculating that the key players in this, and that is Iran and Russia, have been rather busy and preoccupied elsewhere in the world, and that has allowed this insurgency to take place.
You're right. The two outside powers that are supporting the Assad regime are Iran and Russia, very heavily engaged. The third major power that's been heavily involved, of course, is Turkey. And some of this is around the desire of Turkey to take control of areas which they say are controlled by the Kurdish opposition. So there's three-way regional power issues going on. And recently there was a meeting in Doha where there was an attempt by the Turks, the Iranians and the Russians to try and not have what we're now facing with, which is the collapse of the Assad regime. And the collapse not only, of course, after 13 years of civil war, but the Assad regime has been in power with his father of over 50 years. So this is a major, major strategic collapse in the area.
And so for people waking up here who are worried about domestic issues, can you try to explain to people why this is important? You talked about Turkey there. This sits in a very important geopolitical area, doesn't it? Because you've got Lebanon and Turkey. You've got these players such as Iran involved. You've got Russian bases also there, American military interests there as well. This is a powder keg that they're sitting on.
Very much so. I mean, we talked in the past about the Fertile Crescent. That's an old biblical talk. People now talk about it as the Fragile Crescent because you've also got Iraq and northern Iraq. And there's the same mixture of different groups, some Islamists, some Kurdish, some kind of pro-American, some anti-American, is all there. So we've got this really fragile area, and Lebanon itself just gone through a period of fighting as well. What are the impacts? I mean, firstly, regional instability and the difficulty then of trying to make peaceful settlements for some of the ongoing fighting that's going on. That might demonstrate itself or manifest itself for us in terms of refugee movement and everything goes with it. And down the line, issues around security of energy supplies and everything goes with it. So it's a really important region for us. And many of those countries around there are unstable in different ways. And most of the governments there have got a sort of a very fragile hold over parts of the country, if not over the whole area. So it's going to be an additional problem. And we still haven't resolved Lebanon. We've still got Gaza ongoing. We've now got Syria and the ability for it to spread further as well. So we're in for a very, very difficult and marginally chaotic time.
So just to give us some background also, because I think that you've hit the nail on the head there. What people who are messaging this morning are saying is they're most worried about refugees and people coming to this country to escape the civil war that's going on over there, and that is the impact that has here. It's actually broader than that, isn't it? Because when you have a power vacuum, that power vacuum then will be filled by competing forces.
Absolutely, and Syria has got a number of competing forces. I mean, we know about HTS, and they're the Islamist group, or originally Islamist group.
So this is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham.
Hayat al-Sham, yeah. They came down from the northwest, backed by Turkey, and backed by a Turkish support group from there. So they're the northwest. In the northeast, you've got a Kurdish group who the Turks are also very worried about, who they say are supporting Kurdish terrorism in southern Turkey. And then in the southwest, bordering with Israel and Jordan, there's been a third group, and they were the people that run Deraa, who actually started the rebellion in 2011. Now, they also have continued to liberate areas of the country. So you've got three armed groups who don't really work together, all of whom have got their own desire to have some autonomy or some control over it. And then you've got the kind of the rump of the state, which is all that Assad regime held onto around Damascus and the coast. And the coast, of course, is where the Russians have their two bases, Humayman Air Base and Tarsus, which is their naval base. And they're clearly been worried about that as well.
So how does this play out when you've got also an outgoing US president as well? What we need is some stability. You've got President-elect Trump coming in. How does that change this dynamic?
Well, we've had Trump on tweeting on Twitter already this morning. Yeah. Basically
not our war.
Not our war. Nothing to do with us. Stay completely clear from that. I don't think Biden can take that view. I mean, not least which because the linkages through Lebanon and through the ongoing fighting that Israel's involved in. So they'll have to find a way of doing that. What it will be, though, it's hard to tell. I mean, one of the most obvious things would be things like there'll be requirements to do some evacuation. Despite the nature of the Assad regime, there will be nationals from our country, from France, from America, people like that who will be in that country, and they may need to be evacuated. How is that brought about? And then there's also, as I said, the dynamic with Turkey and what they do. Well, the Turks might decide, for example, is one of the things they wanted to do. They wanted to be able to manoeuvre inside Syrian territory. In other words, not just use their proxy forces, but do that as well. What do we think about that? What does Biden think about that? What does Trump think about that? And so all those things are going to be there. I don't think Trump's line. I get what he said because he's always been very clear about his opposition to so-called forever wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, particularly Iraq, and Syria. In terms of its ethnic mix, not quite the same percentages, but has that same diverse and very complicated ethnic and religious mix as Iraq had, which we didn't really properly understand. So I think he's got the message. You go in there at your peril if you don't really understand what you're doing.
Yeah, and in terms of that, of course, we know that Iran is the backer of Hezbollah and Hamas. This complicates matters still further. Just in terms of Assad, it looks like he is now out completely. What happens? What is the response now going to be from Iran and from Russia?
Well, they have been very cautious, interestingly. I mean, they made all the right noises about supporting Assad, and they talked about providing supplies. Russia conducted a series of airstrikes in support of the Syrian Air Force, but they were very limited, and their ability to reinforce themselves, it was very obvious as this campaign developed. They're so tied down in what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, they really couldn't supply very much. Iran was worried about its ability to resupply Hezbollah, or whatever the future of Hezbollah is going to be, but they themselves did not do much beyond rhetoric. So I think they're sort of, Iran's position, particularly in terms of its proxy powers, has been destroyed. I mean, that's what the Israelis have done to them. So they'll be looking to think, well, what do we do for the future? And Russia will be thinking, well, how do we hang on to our bases from there? I don't think either of those two countries are going to do anything in the way of trying to restore a future Assad or Assad type regime. They'll just be sitting tight and waiting to see how things develop.
Let's just move to talk about Zelensky and Ukraine and Notre Dame last night. Zelensky, the only leader to get a round of applause when he went into Notre Dame. President-elect Trump was there as well, and he has vowed to end that war in Ukraine on day one. Zelensky seems now to be giving some sort of some ground to say, look, he's willing to cede various areas of Ukraine if there is a quid pro quo, so there is some sort of buffer zone which is going to be patrolled by European soldiers, not by American soldiers. The dynamic with Trump coming in changes everything.
No, absolutely. He's been clear about it. I think it's very much a kind of Trumpian, I can make a deal, we'll close it in a day. But I think his intention, and I think that the people can see where it's going, is to try and ensure that, if you like, the preliminary work, the preparatory work is done prior to him arriving. And I think whatever our feelings about supporting President Zelensky morally, strategically, everything goes there. There's actually just there's been a gradual realization. I mean, I think I've been saying this for a few months, but actually we have never provided enough arms, ammunition, resources, nor does Ukraine have it, to achieve what they claim was their victory state which was, the recapture of all their territory all the way back to 2014 boundaries. It was never going to happen. So there's always now going to be this rather ugly peace. But what Zelensky's now talking about, he's talked about various things. He's talked about Ukraine joining NATO. I don't think that's going to happen. I think more pertinently, he talked about ensuring that Ukraine had some form of strategic but non-nuclear deterrence, so sufficient forces of sufficient power to deter a future Russian aggression against them. And I think the key thing here for the Europeans, for us, is actually there was always this thing about the day after. Would we continue to support Ukraine even after there was a ceasefire? Because that is really the key to it for them. Not just in terms of military resources, that's important, but the country's been really badly damaged. There are millions of displaced people, there are millions of refugees, and they'll need to come back, and they'll need then to find a way for that country to go forward. So there's a really big role for the Europeans in terms of peace building against what is going to be a very imperfect and in many cases very ugly and even almost distasteful ceasefire. But a ceasefire is probably better now than continual fighting, continual high casualties, and all the impact on infrastructure and people that the continuation of this war is producing.